Within the next minutes, we will explore one of psychology's most silent and devastating mutations of the human spirit, the individual who systematically erases every person from their life. This is not simple introversion or a messy breakup. This is a psychological fortress built brick by brick from the rubble of betrayed trust. The proof lies in the chilling neurological and trauma-based research that reveals how the brain can rewire itself to seek safety in absolute isolation. By understanding this fortress from the inside, people gain the master key to recognizing these patterns in others, or perhaps in the reflection of their own silent retreat from the world. Imagine a mind that once knew connection. It learned the map of intimacy early, with all its landmarks, shared secrets, vulnerable moments, the warmth of reliable presence. For this mind, joy was not a foreign concept. It was a real, tangible thing, found in the laughter of a friend, the comfort of family, the thrill of a lover's promise. The neurological pathways for bonding, fueled by oxytocin and dopamine, were well-traveled roads. But what happens when those same roads become the routes of invasion? What happens when the very channels built for love are repeatedly hijacked by betrayal, abandonment, or overwhelming trauma? The brain, in its ancient wisdom to survive, begins a radical and painful reconstruction project. It doesn't just put up a wall, it designs an impenetrable fortress with a single devastating rule. If everyone is a potential threat, then true safety lies only in total solitude. This isn't a conscious decision made one Tuesday afternoon. It's a slow, psychological compounding interest on pain. Think of it as an emotional immune system gone rogue. After enough exposures to perceived toxins, the friend who used a vulnerability as gossip, the family member whose support was always conditional, the partner who promised permanence and then left, the system declares all foreign bodies a threat. The psychological term is hypervigilance, a state of constant subconscious threat detection, often rooted in complex trauma. The person becomes a master analyst, scanning every word, every gesture, every lapse in communication for the early warning signs of pain they've memorized from the past. A text not returned within a few hours isn't just a busy friend, it's the first echo of neglect. A slightly toned-down goodbye isn't just a bad day, it's the prelude to abandonment. The mind, to protect the heart, begins to sever connections preemptively. It starts with distancing, canceling plans, being slower to reply. Then it moves to deletion, unfollowing, archiving chats. Finally, it escalates to the total blockade, the unanswered call, the door forever closed, the social silhouette wiped clean. Consider the chilling case study from trauma research, often called the Riley case. A patient, successful in her career, presented with no close relationships and a history of cutting off every person who got close, including family. Through therapy, a pattern emerged, linked to a childhood that looked perfect from the outside. Her parents were high achievers who equated love with performance. Every A grade was met with celebration. Every B+ was met with averted eyes and a week of silent disappointment. Her emotional needs were not just neglected, they were weaponized against her. The subconscious lesson was brutal. Connection is conditional, and the terms can change without notice. Her brain learned that reliance on others was the ultimate vulnerability. As an adult, any relationship that entered the territory of genuine need, her needing a friend for support or a partner understanding a failure, triggered a catastrophic shame response. To her psyche, needing someone was the first step toward being annihilated by their disappointment. So she would engineer a conflict or coldly withdraw, becoming the terminator of the relationship before she could be terminated herself. Her fortress wasn't built of hatred, but of a terrified, frozen child convinced it was the only way to survive.
The neuroscience behind this is profound. Functional MRI studies on individuals with attachment trauma show that when they are shown images of intimacy or social reward, the brain's fear center, the amygdala, lights up as if seeing a predator. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation, goes dim. The brain literally processes potential closeness as a life-threatening danger. Furthermore, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, an area involved in processing social pain, becomes hypersensitive. This means the pain of a slight social rejection is not just emotional, it's registered with the same intensity as physical wounding. So, when people talk about being hurt too many times, for these individuals, it is a literal neurological truth. Their cumulative social pain has crossed a threshold. The act of cutting everyone off, then, is not an act of cruelty. It is a desperate last resort surgery performed by a mind that believes it is cutting out cancerous tissue to save the host. It is the ultimate pain avoidance mechanism, choosing the controlled, familiar ache of loneliness over the unpredictable, devastating agony of betrayal. Yet within this fortress, a paradox thrives. The very isolation that feels like safety becomes its own prison. The person may feel a perverse sense of control, even relief, in the immediate aftermath of a mass cutting off. The noise stops, the threats are eliminated. This is the joy they now have access to, a stark, quiet, and hollow peace. It's the joy of a ceasefire in a war they were losing. But the human brain is a social organ. Its development, its chemical balance, its very purpose is intertwined with connection. Studies on prolonged isolation show it increases cortisol, the stress hormone, levels, shrinks the hippocampus, crucial for memory and emotion, and heightens risks for depression and psychosis. The fortress, over time, begins to poison the one it protects. The person inside may stare at their silent phone with a mix of triumph and deep, unutterable sorrow. They have won the battle against hurt by ensuring there is no one left to hurt them. But in doing so, they have also ensured there is no one left to reach them. They are the monarch and the sole prisoner of a silent, empty kingdom. This is the blueprint, a mind so expertly trained in the geography of pain that it demolishes the entire map, choosing to be lost forever rather than risk another wrong turn. But the story does not end in the fortress, because the human spirit, even in its most defended state, retains a flicker of that old map-making desire. It whispers in the quietest hours, a faint signal of what was lost and what could, perhaps, be rebuilt on different terms. The walls, however thick, were built from the inside, and that means the tools for dismantling them, however buried, must be in there too. The fortress, once completed, does not remain a static structure. It evolves, and so does the psyche of its sole inhabitant. The initial relief, the stark joy of silence, begins to morph. The absence of external threat creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushes a new, more intimate enemy, the self. This is the long-term psychological aftermath, a landscape where isolation ceases to be a strategy and becomes an identity. The person who cut everyone off now faces the relentless scrutiny of their own mind, with no external voices to provide distraction, reality checks, or even simple kindness. The brain, deprived of the social mirroring it requires to understand itself, can begin to distort. Thoughts echo in the chamber of solitude, growing louder and more absolute. A minor regret becomes a narrative of fundamental flaw. A moment of loneliness solidifies into proof of unlovability. This is where the hypervigilance that was once turned outward, scans the external world for threat, turns inexorably inward. The prisoner becomes their own jailer, judge, and torturer. Psychological research into prolonged social withdrawal paints a stark picture. A seminal study on the effects of solitary confinement, though an extreme analog, reveals universal human truths. Without social interaction, people experience rapid cognitive decline, intense anxiety, emotional flatlining, and pervasive paranoia. While the individual in their self-made fortress may not be in a physical cell, the neurological parallels are unsettling. The social brain, understimulated, begins to feed on itself. Rumination, repetitive, negative focus on one's distress, becomes the primary mental activity. This isn't just overthinking, it's a cognitive prison loop. The person may spend hours, days replaying every past interaction that led them here, not to find resolution, but to reinforce the walls. Each remembered betrayal, each moment of perceived rejection is another brick mortared in place. The act of cutting off, which began as a defense, transforms into a story the mind tells itself. I am alone because I am ultimately meant to be alone. I am the common denominator, therefore I am the problem. This is the cruelest twist. The defense mechanism designed to protect from external pain becomes the engine of profound internal suffering. Yet within this suffering lies a perverse, almost addictive comfort. This is the dark heart of the fortress. The predictability of solitude becomes a drug. There are no surprises, no emotional ups and downs, no demands. The person achieves a grim mastery over their environment. They control every input, every sound, every potential variable. This level of control can create a strange, anesthetized peace. It's the peace of a hibernating creature, where metabolic processes slow to a bare minimum to preserve life. The emotional range narrows to a flat line, and that flat line can be mistaken for stability. The shock for the outside observer, how can they live like that, misses this critical point. For the individual inside, the chaos of connection, with its terrifying potential for joy and its proven history of pain, is far more threatening than the dead calm of isolation. Their addiction is to safety, even if that safety is a living death. They choose the certainty of misery over the misery of uncertainty. But the human spirit's drive for meaning is tenacious. It rebels against this emotional flatline. This rebellion often manifests not as a healthy reach for connection, but in what psychologists call maladaptive daydreaming, or the construction of elaborate inner worlds. The person may become deeply immersed in fictional universes through books, games, or series, not as entertainment, but as a surrogate social life. They may form intense, parasocial bonds with distant creators or characters, relationships that feel rich and deep, but are entirely safe because they are entirely controlled and require no reciprocity. They cannot be betrayed by a fictional character. Or their inner world may turn darker, rehearsing future conflicts that will never happen, or past conversations where they finally deliver the perfect, devastating speech that seals their righteous isolation. These mental activities are the psyche's attempt to simulate the social nourishment it is being denied, like a body consuming its own muscle for protein. It keeps the mind alive, but it withers the soul. The path out of this fortress is not, contrary to popular self-help advice, about forcing oneself to get out there or to trust again. That approach is akin to throwing a person terrified of water into the deep end of the ocean. It only reinforces the core belief that connection is drowning. The neuroscience of fear extinction provides the blueprint for a more nuanced, internal-first approach. It reveals that the fear pathways, those hyper-alert neural roads lighting up at the thought of intimacy, cannot be erased, but they can be overlaid with new, safer experiences. The process is not demolition, but renovation. It begins not with other people, but with the discovery of the one who was locked inside all along, the self that existed before it became a fortress. The first, most radical step is the cultivation of a conscious, compassionate relationship with the self. For someone whose inner dialogue is a running critique, this is a revolutionary act. It involves treating one's own mind with the curiosity and patience one might offer a frightened animal. Techniques derived from trauma-informed therapies, like internal family systems, suggest we are not a monolithic self, but a collection of parts. The part that cuts people off is not a monster, it is a protector. Its method is brutal, but its intention is survival. The work is to, in the safety of one's own mind, thank this protector for its service, for the years it spent building walls to keep a younger, more vulnerable self safe. Then, gently, to ask if it might now be willing to step aside, just a little, so that the exiled parts, the part that longs for connection, the part that feels joy, the part that is playful or vulnerable, can be witnessed. This internal dialogue is the foundation. Before a single brick is removed from the external walls, the internal war must end with a treaty.
This is where the inspiration emerges, not as a blinding light, but as a slow, dawn-like realization. The key was inside the whole time. It is the capacity for self-witnessing, without judgment. A person might start with tiny, non-threatening acts of re-engagement with the world that feel utterly under their control. Not a party, but a brief, anonymous exchange with a barista. Not a deep confession, but writing a comment on a video that resonates with no expectation of reply. Each small, successful interaction that does not result in pain is a new data point for the brain. It begins to carve a faint new pathway alongside the old fear road. The work of researchers like Dr. Stephen Porges on polyvagal theory underscores this. Safety is not an intellectual concept, but a physiological state. The goal is to help the nervous system learn, in minute doses, that certain types of social micro-interactions can be safe. This could be the feeling of sunlight in a park surrounded by strangers, or the shared, silent focus of a coffee shop. These are low-demand social nutrients that gently coax the system out of its defensive state. The most profound reconciliation often comes when the individual, now developing a more compassionate inner world, re-examines the original blueprints of their fortress. They revisit the old stories, the betrayals and wounds, not to blame others or themselves, but with the understanding of a historian. They ask, given what I knew then, given the tools I had, did my protector make the best choice it could to keep me safe? The answer is almost always yes. This realization brings a wave of grief for the lost years and the lost connections, but also a profound relief. The act of cutting everyone off is reframed from a character flaw, a sign of being broken or cold, into a monumental, if misguided, act of self-preservation. This is the emotional pivot from self-loathing to self-recognition. The person is no longer a prisoner of their past. They become the archaeologist of their own ruin, understanding its construction so they can plan its careful dismantling. The journey back is never about returning to a past self or reclaiming old relationships. That person and those connections are often gone, transformed by time and the very walls that were built. The inspiration lies in the construction of something entirely new, a citadel with a gate. The walls may remain, but they become boundaries, conscious, flexible filters rather than impermeable barriers. The individual learns the delicate art of discernment. They understand that not all social interaction is a threat, and that vulnerability is a currency to be spent wisely, not withheld completely. They may let very few people in, but those they do will be chosen with a hard-won wisdom and welcomed into an inner world that is no longer a battlefield, but a tended garden. The final, most hopeful psychological truth is neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong ability to rewire itself.
The pathways that screamed danger at the sight of closeness can be quieted. The capacity for joy, buried under layers of protective numbness, can be reactivated. It begins with the self. A person finds a sliver of joy in a solitary hobby, a shock of awe in nature, a curious spark in learning something new. These solitary joys are the foundation. They prove that feeling is safe, even within the fortress. From that solid ground, a tentative, authentic reach toward another being becomes possible, not out of neediness, but out of a genuine, shared appreciation for a fragment of the world. The story of those who cut everyone off is not a tragedy with a fixed ending. It is a dark night of the soul that can last for years, but the dawn it promises is uniquely powerful. It is the dawn of a person who has met the depths of their own solitude and returned, not merely seeking light, but having become a more complex, resilient, and deeply compassionate source of light themselves. They are no longer just a fortress or just a prisoner. They have, through the agonizing and courageous work of inner excavation, found the blueprint to become an architect, this time of a life that contains both safe walls and a welcoming door.